They say evil hides behind the most elegant masks. But nothing, nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed on that quiet country road. A man in a tailored suit, a crying newborn in his arms, and a bridge that has seen centuries of storms, but never a betrayal like this. I've written stories about heartbreak, injustice, survival, but this one stayed with me, not just because of the act itself, but because of what happened next. Because just when you think you've seen the worst of humanity, something extraordinary happens, from the most unexpected of heroes. When I first heard about this story, I felt a mix of rage, grief, and disbelief. How could someone do this to their own flesh and blood? And yet, somehow, fate, or perhaps a force greater than fate, intervened. The kind of moment that makes you question what we call instinct and what we call love. I want to know how you feel about this. Do you believe animals can sense right and wrong? Do you think redemption can come from the most unlikely places? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious how this sits with you. Watch until the very end. I have a small surprise waiting for you. Now let's get back to the story and see how it all unfolded. The late afternoon sun bled a bruised orange and purple across a sky that offered no comfort, its fading light doing little to penetrate the oppressive gloom that clung to the lonely winding road. This forgotten ribbon of cracked asphalt led to a desolate stretch of land, distinguished only by an ancient stone bridge, its weathered arches spanning a narrow, swift-moving creek. Moss clung to its damp stones, and the air beneath it was perpetually cool, smelling of wet earth and decay. It was a place for secrets, for endings. A sleek black luxury sedan, incongruous in its opulent splendor against the backdrop of untamed nature, glided to a silent stop at the bridge's edge. The driver's door opened, and Victor Beaumont emerged. He was a man whose success was etched into the severe lines of his expensive suit and the confident, almost arrogant set of his jaw. But today, that confidence was a brittle facade. In his arms, bundled awkwardly, was a newborn infant, Grace. Her tiny face was contorted, her desperate, high-pitched cries tearing at the heavy silence of the encroaching dusk, a primal sound of distress that seemed to accuse the very air around them. Victor's gaze, as it fell upon the wailing child, held none of the tenderness one might expect of a father. Instead, his handsome features were a mask of cold, grim determination, underscored by a flicker of something akin to hunted desperation. He walked, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the loose gravel at the bridge's approach, towards its crumbling stone parapet. His hands, usually so steady whether signing multi-million-dollar contracts or gripping a golf club, trembled almost imperceptibly as he clutched the fragile bundle. The baby's cries intensified, a relentless torrent of innocent anguish. He reached the midpoint of the bridge. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, he hesitated. A spasm of what might have been pain, or perhaps a final, withered shred of conscience, contorted his face. His breath hitched. Then, with a sudden, violent exhalation, the mask of cold resolve slammed back into place. He raised his arms, the tiny, wailing infant held aloft for a sickening instant against the darkening sky, and then, with a choked sound that was almost a sob, he cast Grace over the low stone railing. The baby's piercing cry was abruptly, chillingly, cut short as she hit the cold, rushing water of the creek below. There was a small splash, almost lost in the murmur of the current, followed by the faint, terrible sounds of a desperate, instinctive struggle. Victor stood frozen, a statue carved from ice and regret, his eyes fixed on the turbulent water. A single tear, hot and unexpected, escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He wiped it away with a rough, impatient gesture, as if angered by its betrayal. Not far from the bridge, hidden from the road by a dense thicket of wild rhododendrons and tangled willows, Cooper, a magnificent yellow Labrador retriever with a coat the color of spun gold, was quartering the ground, his sensitive nose pressed to the damp earth. He was exhausted, his powerful muscles aching, his paws tender. For days he had been on a desperate, instinct-driven quest. The scent he followed was faint, muddled by time and distance, the scent of a black sedan and, more poignantly, the lingering, milky aroma of the small human he had, for a brief, cherished time, considered part of his pack. He'd become separated from them, from the woman, Maria, whose gentle hands had always held comfort, and from the tiny new being, Grace, back in a place of confusion and fear, a place he no longer understood. He'd been disoriented, lost, but an unwavering loyalty, a primal canine imperative, had driven him onward, following the ghost of a trail, hour after weary hour. Suddenly, Cooper's head snapped up. His ears, usually soft and floppy, pricked forward, alert. Through the twilight air he heard it. The splash, distinct and unnatural, followed by the faint, terrified cries of an infant. It was a sound that resonated deep within his loyal heart, a distress call that bypassed all his exhaustion. With a surge of adrenaline, he abandoned his methodical tracking and crashed through the undergrowth, bursting from the tree line onto the muddy bank of the creek just as Victor Beaumont's car door slammed shut. Cooper's intelligent brown eyes, wide with dawning horror, took in the scene in an instant: the dark water, the churning current, and most horrifyingly, the tiny, flailing form of baby Grace, struggling feebly, a fragile speck of life being pulled inexorably downstream. There was no hesitation, no thought for his own safety. With a powerful thrust of his hind legs, Cooper launched himself into the icy, fast-flowing water. The cold shocked his already tired body, but he ignored it. He was a strong swimmer, his Labrador breeding making him at home in the water. He reached Grace in a few powerful strokes, his large, gentle muzzle nudging her with infinite care. She was so small, so terrifyingly fragile. He maneuvered his body with remarkable skill, positioning himself upstream of her, using his bulk to shield her from the main force of the current, which threatened to drag her under. Gently, persistently, he began to guide her, nudging and pushing her small, unresponsive form towards the relative safety of the shallower water near the creek's muddy bank. It was an act of pure, selfless heroism, an instinct to protect the helpless that burned brighter than any fear. He managed to push her onto a small, slightly elevated patch of mud and reeds, her tiny limbs still twitching feebly. He stood over her then, a steadfast guardian, his big body trembling from cold and exertion, water streaming from his golden coat. He lowered his great head and licked her cheek with a soft, warm tongue, then nudged her again, as if trying to impart some of his own life force, his own desperate will for her to survive. A low whimper rumbled in his chest, a sound of profound concern and comfort. On the bridge, Victor Beaumont slammed his car into gear. The engine roared, a harsh, discordant sound that shattered the fragile peace of the wilderness. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He accelerated away, tires spitting gravel, convinced that his terrible problem, his inconvenient secret, had been consigned to the cold, indifferent waters of the creek. He was oblivious to the miracle that had just unfolded, unaware that his act of monstrous cruelty had been witnessed, and its fatal consequence averted by the unwavering courage of a lost and loyal dog. A quiet, rustic farmhouse nestled in a patchwork of fields and small orchards, not many miles from that desolate bridge. Clara, a woman of 28 with kind eyes and hands calloused from working the earth, was tending her late-season vegetable garden. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp soil and approaching night. Suddenly she paused, her trowel halfway to the earth. A dog's bark, urgent and insistent, carried on the evening breeze. It wasn't a playful bark, nor the territorial challenge of a familiar neighborhood dog. This was different. There was a note of anxiety in it, a desperate, almost frantic edge that made the fine hairs on her arms prickle. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the old creek, a place she rarely saw stray animals. Wiping her hands on her denim apron, a frown of concern etching itself between her brows, Clara began to walk towards the sound. The barking continued, unwavering, a summons she couldn't ignore. The closer she got to the creek, the stronger the premonition grew, a strange, unsettling feeling that she was about to encounter something far outside the realm of her ordinary, peaceful existence. She pushed aside a curtain of weeping willow branches and stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. The sight before her was so surreal, so utterly unbelievable, that for a moment she wondered if she was dreaming. There, standing in the shallow, murky water at the edge of the creek, was a magnificent yellow Labrador, his entire body drenched and shivering, his golden fur plastered to his skin. And huddled on the muddy bank, sheltered by the dog's protective stance, was a baby. A tiny, impossibly small, pink-skinned infant, its limbs moving with a faint, weak energy. "Oh my God," Clara whispered, the words escaping her in a choked gasp. The scene was a paradox, an image of desperate vulnerability, juxtaposed with one of astonishing, selfless protection. She didn't hesitate. Her feet, suddenly light, carried her splashing through the shallow water towards them. She knelt beside the infant, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was so tiny, so cold. Its skin was mottled, its breathing shallow. As she reached for it, the baby's eyes, startlingly blue, flickered open and seemed to fix on her face. With gentle, trembling hands, Clara gathered the fragile creature into her arms. It was lighter than she could have imagined, its vulnerability a palpable weight. Without a second thought, she unbuttoned her thin cotton jacket and wrapped it around the baby, trying to impart some of her own warmth. Cooper, his duty done, his precious charge now in presumably safe hands, remained close. He let out a soft, low whimper, his tail giving a single hesitant thump against the wet mud. He looked up at Clara, his intelligent brown eyes filled with an expression of profound trust, of an almost human understanding, as if he were formally, solemnly, entrusting this precious life into her care. "Oh, you brave, brave boy," Clara murmured, her voice thick with emotion, stroking the dog's wet head. Then, cradling the baby close, she whispered to the tiny, silent infant, "How on earth did you get here, little one? Where did you come from?" Her gaze swept the desolate surroundings, the darkening woods, the empty creek bank, the silent, uncaring bridge in the distance. There was no one, no footprints other than her own and the dog's. No sign of how such a tiny, helpless being could have ended up in such a perilous, forgotten place. Only the loyal, exhausted dog and the miracle in her arms. The walk back to the small, slightly ramshackle farmhouse that Clara and Miguel called home felt impossibly long, each step a heavy measure against the rapidly fading light. Clara cradled the tiny, jacket-wrapped bundle against her chest. The infant's surprising weight, a fragile anchor in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. Grace. The name had come to her unbidden, as soft and unexpected as the baby's flickering gaze had been by the creek. Cooper, his magnificent golden coat still damp and smelling of river water and wet earth, padded silently, faithfully, at her heels, his large head occasionally lifting to peer with an almost human anxiety at the precious cargo in Clara's arms. A maelstrom of questions churned within Clara. Who could do such a thing? Leave a perfect, helpless newborn to the mercy of the elements, to the cold indifference of the creek? Were they young, scared, desperate, or simply monstrous? The image of that sleek, black sedan Victor Beaumont had driven, a fleeting glimpse as it sped away from the bridge, flashed in her mind, incongruous and unsettling, though she couldn't yet place its significance. And the dog, this incredible, brave dog, where had he come from? He was no stray. His coat, though dirty, was well kept, his demeanor intelligent and trusting. Had he belonged to the baby's family? Had he, too, been abandoned? The sheer cruelty of it all, juxtaposed with the dog's selfless heroism, made her heart ache with a confusing mix of rage and profound tenderness. The porch light of their small house cast a welcoming, if feeble, yellow glow as they approached. Miguel was silhouetted in the doorway, a lean, worried figure, obviously alerted by Cooper's earlier barks and then the subsequent unsettling silence. His face, already etched with the lines of financial strain from his recent layoff at the local mill, tightened further as Clara stepped into the light, the strange dog at her side, the unidentifiable bundle in her arms. Clara. What in God's name? His voice, usually warm and steady, was sharp with alarm and disbelief. He stared, first at the exhausted, wet Labrador, then at the swaddled infant in Clara's arms. Clara's explanation was brief, her voice trembling slightly as she recounted the unbelievable scene by the creek. I found her, Miguel, by the old stone bridge. She was in the water. This dog, she gestured towards Cooper, who sat patiently by the door, his intelligent eyes fixed on her. He pulled her out. He was protecting her. Miguel, a man whose pragmatism was both his strength and, at times, a source of friction between them, looked utterly poleaxed. Horror, then a dawning, incredulous understanding, flickered across his face. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. A baby, Clara. You found a baby. But how, who? He stepped aside, his initial shock giving way to a pressing need for answers, for some semblance of logic in a situation that defied it. Clara, you know we can't. We can barely manage as it is. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air between them. Their own struggles, their precarious financial situation, the small savings dwindling with each passing week. He remained unemployed. He stopped short, his protest dying on his lips as he caught the fierce, unyielding determination in Clara's eyes. And then, as she gently adjusted the jacket, the almost translucent fragility of the infant nestled within. Grace, as if sensing the tension, let out a tiny, mewling cry. Later, after Clara had managed to clean the baby with warm water and wrap her in a soft, worn flannel nightgown, one she herself had worn as a child, she discovered it. As she gently powdered the infant's delicate skin, she noticed a tiny, exquisitely perfect, star-shaped birthmark, a delicate pale crimson against the creamy skin of Grace's right shoulder. It was unique, a tiny celestial map on this child Shui had seemingly fallen from the sky. The argument, when it came, was hushed but intense, fueled by love, fear, and the harsh realities of their lives. We have to call the sheriff, Clara, Miguel insisted, his voice strained. Child services, they'll know what to do. We aren't equipped for this. Clara's eyes flashed. And what will they do, Miguel? Take her away. Put her in some overcrowded facility. She was thrown away like trash. If it weren't for Cooper, she gestured again to the Labrador, who had curled up protectively beside the makeshift bassinet, a padded laundry basket. They'd prepared for Grace. She would have drowned. She would be dead. We're not just finding her, Miguel, we are saving her. This is a life. As if on cue, Grace began to cry, a thin, reedy wail that tugged at something deep within Miguel. Clara picked her up, her movements practiced and soothing, rocking her gently, whispering soft nonsense words. Almost instantly, the crying subsided, replaced by soft, contented gurgles, as Grace snuggled against Clara's warmth. Miguel watched them, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. The irony was a bitter pill. Irony was a For years they had yearned for a child. endured the quiet heartbreak of empty arms and unfulfilled dreams, the hushed commiserations of well-meaning friends, the invasive questions from relatives. And now, a child had literally been delivered to their doorstep, a miracle wrapped in a nightmare. A new worry began to surface as the initial shock wore off. "She needs proper medical attention, Clara," Miguel said quietly later that night, his gaze fixed on the sleeping infant. "Listen to her breathing. It sounds wheezy, rattly." Clara leaned closer, her ear near Grace's tiny chest. He was right. There was a faint, raspy quality to each small inhalation. "The creek water was so cold," she whispered, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. She was in it for who knows how long. She might have inhaled some. Oh, Miguel, what if she gets pneumonia? The first week was a blur of sleepless nights, makeshift feedings with a dropper and diluted cow's milk, all they had, and constant gnawing anxiety. Clara and Miguel moved like automatons, taking turns watching over Grace, their exhaustion a heavy blanket. Cooper rarely left the baby's side. He would lie patiently beside the laundry basket, his head resting on his paws, his eyes following every movement. If Grace whimpered, his ears would prick, and he would let out a soft, concerned whine, nudging Clara or Miguel until one of them attended to her. He was an unwavering, furry sentinel, his devotion to the tiny infant absolute and deeply moving. But despite their loving, if inexperienced care, Grace's condition began to deteriorate. The slight wheeze became a persistent rattling cough that shook her tiny frame. Her small lips, once a healthy pink, now often had a faint, bluish tinge, especially after a coughing fit. Her cries were weaker, more fretful. "She's getting worse, Clara," Miguel said one evening, his voice heavy with a dread that mirrored her own. He'd been gently patting Grace's back, trying to ease her labored breathing. "That cough, it's deeper. We can't keep pretending this is something we can handle on our own. We need medical help, real help." Clara's carefully constructed composure crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. I know," she choked out, her voice ragged with despair. "But if we take her to a hospital, to the authorities, they'll ask questions we can't answer. They'll take her away from us, Miguel. After everything. After Cooper saved her. After we've... I can't lose her now." The unspoken "I love her" hung in the air, as palpable as the scent of wood smoke from their small stove. Miguel pulled her into his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I know, Cara, I know," he murmured against her hair. "But if we do nothing, if we let our fear stop us from getting her the help she needs, we could lose her another way, a way we'd never forgive ourselves for." His logic, as always, was inescapable, cutting through her emotional turmoil with painful clarity. A flicker of an idea, a desperate, long-shot hope, ignited in Clara's mind. "Dr. Peterson," she breathed, pulling back to look at Miguel, her eyes wide. "Old Dr. Peterson. Remember him? From when your mama was so sick, Doctor?" Peterson was a retired physician, a beloved figure in their rural community, known for his gentle manner, his old-fashioned wisdom, and most importantly, his discretion. He had a reputation for helping folks in tight spots, for valuing people over bureaucracy. He's retired, but he still sees a few old patients, doesn't he? Maybe he would help us. Just look at her, advise us. The unspoken risk hung heavy between them, involving Dr. Peterson meant revealing their secret, trusting him not to report them. It meant placing their fragile, illicit happiness and Grace's very presence in their lives in his hands. Miguel hesitated, the conflict warring on his face. He looked at Grace, her small chest rising and falling with a distressing effort, then at Clara's pleading, tear-streaked face. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he nodded, a single, reluctant gesture of assent. "All right, Clara. We can try Dr. Peterson, But if he can't help, or if he says she needs the hospital, we do what he says. Promise me. I promise, Clara whispered, relief and a fresh wave of anxiety washing over her in equal measure. The following afternoon, after a mostly sleepless night spent listening to Grace's rasping coughs, Clara carefully, tenderly, wrapped the baby in their warmest woolen blanket. With Cooper trotting anxiously beside her, his tail tucked low, as if sensing the gravity of their mission, she set off on the 2-mile walk to Dr. Peterson's secluded cottage on the outskirts of town. Each step was a prayer. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves on the trees a riot of red and gold, but Clara barely noticed the beauty around her. Her focus was entirely on the precious, fragile bundle in her arms, and the hope, however slim, that lay at the end of their journey. Her heart pounded a nervous rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the crunch of her boots on the gravel path, as she finally reached the old doctor's weathered front door and raised a trembling hand to knock. The weathered oak door of Dr. Peterson's cottage creaked open, revealing the man himself, tall and slightly stooped, with a kind, deeply lined face and eyes that held a lifetime of quiet wisdom and empathy. He smiled gently at Clara, his gaze then falling to the bundled infant in her arms, and then to Cooper, who stood patiently but alertly at Clara's side. "Clara, my dear," he said, his voice a warm, comforting rumble. "And a canine companion, I see. Please, come in. Come out of this autumn chill." He led them into a cozy, book-lined study that smelled faintly of old paper, pipe tobacco, and antiseptic. Clara, her heart still a frantic drum against her ribs, found herself soothed by the doctor's calm demeanor. He carefully took Grace from her, his large, surprisingly gentle hands expertly unwrapping the blankets. He listened intently with his stethoscope to Grace's tiny chest, his brow furrowed in concentration, then checked her temperature and the color of her nail beds. Cooper whined softly, pressing his wet nose into Clara's hand, his anxiety palpable. "Well, young lady, doctor," Peterson murmured, his gaze softening as he looked at Grace's small, pale face. "You've had quite an ordeal, haven't you?" He looked up at Clara. "She's definitely running a bit of a fever, and there's some congestion in her lungs. Mild hypothermia initially, I'd wager. And yes, I'd say there's a strong possibility of early-stage pneumonia, likely from aspirating some of that cold creek water." He saw the terror leap into Clara's eyes and quickly added, "But it's treatable, Clara. Definitely treatable, especially if we act fast. She's a fighter, this little one, I can tell." Tears of relief and fear warred in Clara's eyes. She quickly, haltingly explained their impossible situation, finding Grace by the creek, the mysterious circumstances, their inability to go to the hospital or the authorities for fear of losing the child they had already, in the space of a mere week, come to love so fiercely. She spoke of their financial struggles, their fear of a system that might not understand, or worse, might not care, might not. Dr. Peterson listened patiently, his gaze never leaving Clara's face, his expression unreadable. When she had finished, a long silence filled the room, broken only by Grace's occasional raspy sigh. Cooper laid his head on Clara's knee, a comforting weight. Finally, the old doctor nodded slowly. "Clara," he said, his voice imbued with a profound compassion, "sometimes the most complicated stories, the ones tangled in fear and desperation, are the very ones most in need of a little old-fashioned human kindness, a little bending of the stricter rules." A faint smile touched his lips. "I'll help you. We'll treat her here discreetly. But you must follow my instructions to the letter." He then outlined a course of antibiotics and an anti-inflammatory, along with instructions for steam inhalation and keeping Grace warm and hydrated, as Dr. Peterson meticulously measured out the first dose of medication. His gaze kept returning to Grace, who lay quietly in Clara's arms, her tiny fingers curled around one of Clara's own. You know, he said thoughtfully, his head tilted, this child, she has some rather distinctive physical features. There's a certain set to her jaw and her eyes. He peered closer at Grace's face. They remind me very much of someone I used to know, a long time ago. And more recently, his family. The Beaumonts. Specifically, Victor Beaumont. He described a particular shade of hazel in Grace's eyes, flecked with tiny, almost imperceptible gold specks, a trait he remembered distinctly. Clara felt a chill snake down her spine, cold and sharp despite the warmth of the doctor's study. Victor Beaumont. The name was synonymous with immense wealth, with sprawling estates and untouchable power throughout the entire region. He was a titan of industry, a man whose face occasionally graced the glossy pages of business magazines, always looking impeccably tailored, formidably successful, and utterly, icily remote. The man in the black sedan at the bridge. The Beaumonts, she whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. No, it can't be. Why would someone like Victor Beaumont? The implication hung, unspoken and horrifying. Dr. Peterson sighed, his kind face clouded with a sudden gravity. There have been whispers, Clara, rumors, the kind that circulate in small communities about prominent families. He spoke of hushed talk surrounding the Beaumont household, talk of a mysterious, almost reclusive pregnancy concerning Victor's wife Eleanor, a woman rarely seen in public. And darker, more insidious rumors, whispers of other children, previous incidents over the years, conveniently and quietly resolved. He then recounted a peculiar, unsettling phone call he'd received about 2 weeks prior. An educated, cultured male voice, eerily similar in tone and cadence to what he remembered of Victor Beaumont's public speaking voice, had made a series of oblique, hypothetical inquiries about the legal and medical procedures involved if a newborn infant were to disappear. How one might ensure such a disappearance left no official trace, no inconvenient records. At the time, he'd dismissed it as a prank call, albeit a disturbing one. Now, looking at the tiny infant in Clara's arms, the call took on a chilling new significance. Clara, Dr. Peterson said, his voice low and urgent, his eyes filled with a grave concern. If my suspicions have any merit, if this child is indeed connected to Victor Beaumont, then you are caring for the offspring of a man who clearly did not want her. A man who, furthermore, would likely go to any lengths to ensure her existence and his connection to her remains a deeply buried secret. His gaze was direct and unwavering. You and Miguel, you could be in very real danger. The walk home was a blur of fear and dawning, sickening comprehension. Clara relayed every word, every nuance of Dr. Peterson's suspicions and warnings to a horrified Miguel. The fragile bubble of hope and love they had built around Grace felt suddenly, terrifyingly vulnerable. If this is true, Clara, Miguel said, his voice hoarse, his face pale beneath his sun-weathered skin. If that baby is his, Victor Beaumont could destroy us. He could ruin our lives with a single phone call, and no one would dare question him. Clara clutched Grace tighter, a fierce, protective instinct surging through her. But why, Miguel? Why go to such lengths? There's something more here, something he's desperately trying to hide, something far bigger and darker than just not wanting another child. A few days later, as a nervous Clara was administering Grace's medication, the baby's breathing already a little easier, the bluish tinge around her lips receding thanks to the antibiotics. Doctor. Peterson made an unexpected house call. His usually calm face was troubled, his demeanor urgent. He had, he explained, been doing some quiet, discreet remembering, piecing together fragments of past encounters. There's something more I need to tell you, he said, his voice low, after checking on Grace's progress. About 3 years ago, I was called upon to provide clandestine medical assistance to a young woman. She was employed at one of Victor Beaumont's more remote agricultural properties, a place few people ever visit. She was pregnant, terrified. She told me her employer, he paused, his meaning clear, had strictly forbidden her from seeking any official medical help, from creating any record of her pregnancy. She had features, Clara. Physical traits, the same distinctive hazel eyes, the same gold flecks as this little one. He leaned forward, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. I've been thinking. The rumors about Eleanor Beaumont's mysterious pregnancy, they never quite added up. She's older. There were whispers of health issues. What if Grace isn't Eleanor's child at all? What if she's the child of another young woman, perhaps one of his employees, someone Victor Beaumont exploited, then forced to conceal the pregnancy, and subsequently, the child? His hypothesis hung in the air, sickening in its plausibility. The abandonment. It wouldn't just be about not wanting a child. It would be about eliminating evidence. Evidence of a crime, perhaps. A pattern of abuse. As if summoned by the dark turn of their conversation, the low growl of a powerful engine drifted through the open kitchen window. Clara's blood ran cold. Cooper, who'd been dozing by the hearth, shot to his feet, a low, guttural rumble vibrating in his chest. He bolted to the front door, his barking now a furious, continuous volley of aggression. Through the small window pane, Clara saw it, a gleaming black luxury sedan, identical to the one she'd glimpsed at the bridge, slowly, menacingly, pulling into their short, gravel driveway. Victor Beaumont emerged, the epitome of tailored elegance and cold, calculated power. His eyes, those same unsettling hazel eyes Dr. Peterson had described, swept over their humble farmhouse with a Malcano, appraising gaze. Cooper's barking intensified, his body rigid, hackles raised. As he stood squarely in the doorway, a furry, four-legged guardian barring entry, his animosity towards Victor palpable and absolute. Victor, seemingly unfazed by the dog's ferocity, approached the porch, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice smooth, cultured, yet with an underlying edge of steel. He addressed Clara and Miguel, who had appeared hesitantly behind the still barking Cooper. "I'm making some inquiries in the area. There have been reports of unusual activities, vagrants, poachers perhaps." His gaze was sharp, probing. "I'm particularly interested in any information regarding people who might be unofficially caring for children who are not their own." He let the words hang in the air, then added, almost as an afterthought, "There's a substantial reward for any useful information, of course." His eyes, however, lingered on Cooper with a strange, almost unnerving intensity. Suddenly Cooper let out a very specific, high-pitched bark, a sound of intense agitation mixed with a strange note of recognition. The exact same peculiar bark Clara had heard by the creek just moments after Grace's rescue, when the dog had been looking back towards the bridge. Victor Beaumont stopped short, his head snapping towards the dog, his eyes narrowed, his focus on Cooper absolute. "An interesting animal," he said slowly, his voice devoid of its earlier superficial charm, now flat and cold. He took a deliberate step closer, his gaze fixed on the Labrador. "Tell me," he said, his voice deceptively casual, "does this dog of yours often frequent the area down by the old stone creek? The one near the bridge?" The question, so specific, so pointed, landed like a physical blow. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Miguel instinctively put a protective arm around her. Victor's lips curved into a semblance of a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were like chips of hazel ice. Before turning to leave, he delivered his parting shot, each word chosen with deliberate, chilling precision. "Do keep an eye out, especially if you happen to find any abandoned children. These situations, you understand, can be exceptionally delicate. He gave them one last, lingering look, then turned, strode back to his car, and drove away, leaving a thick pall of fear and menace in his wake. Clara and Miguel stared after the departing car, their hearts hammering, their bodies rigid with terror. It was Miguel who finally broke the horrified silence, his voice a ragged whisper. He wasn't looking for a baby someone else might have found, Clara. My God. He wasn't looking for a foundling at all. He was checking. He was checking to see if the baby he abandoned is truly dead. The shrill ring of the telephone inside the house made them both jump violently. Clara, her legs feeling like lead, stumbled inside to answer it. It was Dr. Peterson, his voice crackling with an uncharacteristic urgency. Clara? Miguel, I just saw Victor Beaumont's car heading away from your direction. He didn't stop here, but I saw him turn off your road. Listen to me. Something extraordinary has just happened. I received the strangest, most desperate phone call moments ago. A young woman. Her name is Maria Santos. She's searching frantically for her newborn son. She says the baby boy has a distinctive star-shaped birthmark on his right shoulder and was forcibly taken from her, she said, about 2 weeks ago, by the wealthy family she was working for. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled gasp escaping her. She snatched the receiver from Miguel, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. A son, with a star-shaped birthmark. But Grace was a girl. Wasn't she? The world seemed to tilt and spin around her. The chilling echo of Victor Beaumont's parting threat still hung heavy in the small farmhouse kitchen when Dr. Peterson's urgent voice crackled over the telephone line, each word a fresh jolt to Clara's already frayed nerves. Maria Santos, a mother searching for her newborn son, a baby with a star-shaped birthmark, taken by a wealthy family. Clara's hand clutching the receiver trembled violently. Grace, her Grace, had that same unique mark, but Grace was a girl. The dissonance was a confusing, sickening lurch in her stomach. Maria, Clara managed, her voice barely a whisper, the name feeling foreign yet intimately, terrifyingly connected to the child sleeping fitfully in the makeshift bassinet nearby. Maria, Dr. Peterson says you're at the bus station. Listen to me, you might be in danger there. Can you possibly get to Dr. Peterson's house? He lives on Willow Creek Lane, the little white cottage with the blue shutters. A hesitant, frightened female voice answered, laced with a Spanish accent. Dr. Peterson, yes, he called. He said, but who is this? How do you know? The fear in Maria's voice was palpable. I think I am being watched. There are men. Dr. Peterson, sensing the escalating panic, gently took the phone from Clara. His tone was calm, authoritative, designed to reassure. Maria, this is Dr. Peterson again. Listen very carefully. The woman who just spoke, Clara, she may have news about your child. But you are right to be cautious. The bus station is too exposed. He paused, then continued with clear, concise instructions. Maria, about 3 blocks west of the bus station on Elm Street, there's a small old Catholic church, St. Joseph's. Do you know it? A faint affirmative. Good. Go there immediately. Don't run, just walk quickly and try not to draw attention. Inside, to the left of the altar, you'll find the confessional booths. Wait in the one furthest from the door. It's a quiet, safe place. I know the priest there, Father John. He is a good man, very discreet. I will call him now. We will meet you there. After a moment, Maria, her voice trembling but resolute, agreed. As Dr. Peterson ended the call, a heavy silence descended upon the small kitchen. Clara stared down at Grace, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Hope, sharp and poignant, for the distraught mother on the phone, and a profound, aching dread at what that hope might mean for her, for Miguel, for the fragile, nascent bond she had formed with this tiny, abandoned child. Dr. Peterson's kind eyes rested on Clara, his expression filled with a gentle understanding. "Clara, my dear," he said softly, "you understand what this implies, don't you? If this Maria Santos is indeed who she says she is, then this precious baby in your care has a mother who clearly loves her very much, a mother who is risking everything, perhaps even her life, to find her." Miguel, who had been listening with a grim, pale face, added in a low, rough voice, "And it means we might have to give her back, Clara. If she's truly her mother." The words, though spoken with a heavy heart, were an acknowledgement of an unavoidable ethical truth. But Dr. Peterson's expression grew even graver. "It's more complicated and potentially more dangerous than just that, I'm afraid," he warned, his voice dropping. "Think about it. If Maria is, as she suspects, being tracked by private investigators, and who else but Victor Beaumont, or perhaps even his wife Eleanor, would have the resources and the motive to hire them? And if Victor himself was just here, sniffing around, as you put it, asking pointed questions about abandoned babies and that specific creek?" He let the implication hang. "It means you, Clara, and you, Miguel, are now directly in their line of sight. You are all in considerable danger." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "A living child, especially one whose very existence is a threat to a powerful man, is living proof. And proof, Clara, has a way of talking, especially when it grows up. We are no longer dealing with a simple case of a man trying to evade paternal responsibility. This feels much darker. This feels like an attempt to eliminate evidence. Potentially evidence of very serious crimes." The old doctor's words painted a terrifying picture. The air in the kitchen grew thick with unspoken fears. Victor Beaumont wasn't just a callous father. He was a dangerous man with dark secrets. A man who would likely stop at nothing to protect them. Clara looked at Grace, her tiny face serene in sleep, oblivious to the storm gathering around her. A fierce, protective resolve solidified within her. "Then we go," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, her decision made. "There's no other choice. It's time for Grace to meet her mother." The interior of Sintine. Joseph's church was cool and dim, smelling of old incense, beeswax polish, and a faint, lingering scent of lilies. Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass windows depicting scenes from the life of Christ, cast jeweled patterns on the polished wooden pews. Father John, a kindly, unassuming man in his late 50s with a gentle smile and compassionate eyes, met them at a small side entrance as Dr. Peterson had arranged. He had already spoken with Maria, he explained in a low whisper, and had guided her to the sanctity of the confessional. He led Clara, Miguel, Dr. Peterson, and a quietly attentive Cooper through the hushed, empty nave towards the shadowed alcove. Maria Santos was huddled in the small, dark space of the confessional, a figure of profound exhaustion and frayed nerves. Her dark hair was matted, her clothes rumpled from days, perhaps weeks, on the run. She was younger than Clara had imagined, perhaps only in her early 20s, with large, haunted dark eyes that were pools of fear and desperate hope. As Clara approached, holding Grace, Maria's breath caught in a ragged gasp, her gaze locking onto the bundled infant with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. Is it my child?" Maria whispered, her voice a raw, trembling thread of sound. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Clara knelt slowly, carefully, her heart aching for this terrified young woman. She gently parted the soft woolen blanket, revealing Grace's tiny sleeping face. Maria let out a small, choked cry, a sound that was half relief, half a sob of unutterable grief. "Oh, Dios mío, my son, my little Noah," she breathed, her hand shaking violently, reaching out to tenderly, reverently, touch Grace's soft cheek. Then, as she looked closer, a flicker of confusion crossed her face. "But she..." Clara understood the unspoken question. We named her Grace," she said softly. "She's a girl, Maria." Tears streamed down Maria's face. A girl. They told me I had a son." She looked at the star-shaped birthmark on Grace's shoulder, which Clara gently revealed. "But that mark, it is the same. My baby, my daughter." A fresh wave of sobs shook her. I was so sure she was dead. He looked so unhinged when he came back without her." Slowly, haltingly, encouraged by Clara's gentle presence and Dr. Peterson's quiet reassurance, Maria began to tell her story, a harrowing tale of vulnerability, exploitation, and unimaginable cruelty. She had come to this country full of hope, she explained, securing a position as a housekeeper on the sprawling Beaumont estate. Victor Beaumont, a man of charm when he chose to be and of terrifying power always, had begun to pursue her, especially when his wife Eleanor was away on one of her frequent, extended trips. Maria had tried to resist his advances, but she was alone, isolated, her immigration status precarious. He had threatened her, not overtly at first, but with the chilling implication of what a man of his influence could do to a young woman with no one to protect her. When she discovered she was pregnant, her world had crumbled. Victor's reaction had not been one of concern, or even of grudging acceptance, but of cold, calculating fury. He had immediately moved her from the main house to a small, isolated cottage on a remote, rarely visited part of the vast Beaumont property, effectively imprisoning her, cutting her off from any outside contact. And it was there, in that lonely, forgotten place, that Cooper had become her shadow, her only confidant, her sole comfort in a world of fear and uncertainty. He had belonged to the estate, a hunting dog left behind, but he had quickly, unerringly attached himself to Maria, his loyalty a silent rebuke to the cruelty of his supposed master. Maria's voice grew colder, flatter, as she spoke of Eleanor Beaumont. His wife, she knew. She found out about the baby. Far from being a wronged spouse, Eleanor, it seemed, had been an active, even enthusiastic participant in the ensuing deception. It was Eleanor, I think, who devised the plan. She started to pretend she was pregnant. The staff were told. There were announcements. She would wear loose clothing, talk about nurseries. The chilling calculation of it, the sheer premeditated cruelty of a woman stealing another's child to present as her own, was breathtaking. When it was time for my baby to be born, Maria continued, her voice cracking, a private doctor came to the cottage. A man I had never seen before, with cold eyes and colder hands. As soon as Grace was born, Victor was there. He snatched her from me, even before I could truly hold her. Her gaze drifted to Cooper, who whined softly and licked her trembling hand. Cooper, my brave Cooper. He barked and barked. He tried to stop Victor. He even bit at his ankles, but Victor kicked him away. Victor, he just looked at me and said I would never see my baby again, that she was his and Eleanor's now. Her eyes flashed with a sudden, fierce defiance. But I refused. I told them I would never sign any papers. I would never give my child away. That's when Victor, he became truly violent. He locked me in my room. He threatened to have me deported, to have me disappear. He said no one would ever believe me. She paused, taking a shuddering breath. A few days later, I heard Victor return to the main house on the estate. He was alone. I saw his face from my window. He looked agitated, distraught. I just knew in my heart that something terrible had happened to my baby. That night I managed to break the lock on my window. I ran. Cooper somehow got loose from the kennels during the commotion I created. He tried to follow me, but it was dark, chaotic. We got separated in the woods. I've been searching ever since for my baby and for my Cooper. As if understanding his name, Cooper, who had been sitting quietly beside Clara, let out a sudden, excited whimper. He recognized the voice, the scent, the beloved presence of the woman who had been his whole world in that lonely cottage. He scrambled to his feet and rushed towards Maria, his tail wagging furiously, his whole body wiggling with an ecstasy of recognition. He licked her face, her hands, whining with joy. Maria collapsed into sobs, burying her face in his thick golden fur. Cooper, oh my Cooper. You found me, or I found you. The raw, unadulterated emotion of their reunion filled the small, sacred space, a testament to a bond that no cruelty could sever. It was a moment that erased any lingering doubt in Clara's or Miguel's minds. This was the truth. This was Grace's mother. Grace, awakened by the commotion, opened her startlingly blue hazel eyes and looked directly at Maria. There was no fear in her gaze, only a calm, unnervingly profound recognition, as if some ancient, primal bond resonated between them. Maria, her face streaked with tears, her voice choked with emotion, hesitantly reached out her arms. May I hold her, Clara? Her own eyes brimming, carefully, gently, transferred the small, warm bundle into Maria's trembling embrace. Maria clutched her daughter, her precious Grace, as if she were the most precious treasure in the universe, rocking her gently, her lips moving in a silent litany of love and apology. Grace, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. My beautiful Grace, my daughter, Mama's here. Mama will never let you go again. The tender, fragile moment was shattered by Father John's sudden, urgent appearance at the confessional door. His kind face was pale, his eyes wide with alarm. Maria, Clara, Dr. Peterson, he whispered, his voice strained. There are men outside. 2 black sedans parked across the street. Men in dark suits. They are watching the church, asking questions at the corner store. Maria gasped, her body going rigid, her arms tightening protectively around Grace. No, it can't be. Private investigators, she breathed, her voice hoarse with terror. They've found me. It must be Victor's men, or Eleanor's. They know I escaped. Clara's mind raced. Victor's visit, his pointed questions. The reward. He wasn't just looking, he was hunting. And now Maria was here. Grace was here. They were all in the crosshairs. Maria, Clara said, her voice low but firm with a sudden, fierce resolve. You can't stay here. You're not safe. You'll come with us. We'll protect you. All of you. Miguel, his own fear palpable but overshadowed by a surge of protective anger, nodded his grim assent. Father John, his face a mask of worry, quickly led them through a narrow, seldom-used door concealed behind the sacristy altar. It opened into a small, overgrown cemetery, the ancient, leaning headstones dappled in the late afternoon sun. From there, a short, winding path led to the back entrance of the old stone rectory. Once inside the relative safety of the rectory's dusty, book-filled study, Maria, her composure slowly returning, revealed another, even more critical piece of information. Her eyes, though still shadowed with fear, now held a spark of steely determination. Before I fled that terrible place, she said, her voice gaining strength, while Victor was distracted after he returned without Grace. I managed to get into his private office in the cottage. I was looking for anything that might help me find my baby. And I found more. She took a deep breath. I found documents, papers, not just proof of what he did to me, of his control over me, but other things, ledgers, records of very strange financial transactions, large sums of money moving through shell corporations. It looked like money laundering. And her voice dropped to a horrified whisper. There was a list, Father, a list of names. Other young women who had worked for him on his various properties over the years, women who had encountered problems, as one of his notes put it, women who had become pregnant, and who had then disappeared, vanished without a trace. Doctor Peterson, his face grim, asked the crucial question. Maria, these documents, where are they now? Do you have them? Maria shook her head. No, not with me. It was too dangerous to carry them. But I was not entirely foolish. Before I left the state where the Beaumonts have their main holdings, I managed to place copies in a safe deposit box at a bank in the state capital. She looked at them, her gaze unwavering. I left explicit instructions with a lawyer I found, a young woman who seemed to believe me. The documents are to be delivered to a list of major newspapers and to the state attorney general if anything happens to me. If I disappear. But, she added, her voice filled with a desperate urgency, those documents need my testimony to give them full context, to make them truly powerful. I need to be alive to tell my story, to speak for those other women who can no longer speak for themselves. A heavy silence filled the room. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This was no longer just about one abandoned child, one abused mother. This was about a pattern of potential criminality, of serial exploitation, perhaps even murder, orchestrated by one of the most powerful men in the state. The fragile quiet was shattered by Father John bursting back into the room, his face ashen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They're here, he whispered, his voice choked with alarm. Those men, they're going door to door in the neighborhood, showing photographs, offering a very large reward for information. He wrung his hands. One photograph. It's of you, Maria. But the other... Oh, dear Lord, the other photograph. It's of you two, Clara and Miguel. The chilling realization struck them all simultaneously. Victor Beaumont, or perhaps the equally ruthless Eleanor, hadn't just been sniffing around. They had been actively investigating, tracking Clara and Miguel, probably ever since they had first been seen with Cooper, or perhaps even from the moment Grace had been found. Their brief, desperate haven was no longer safe. Doctor. Peterson's voice cut through the rising panic, calm and decisive. There's only one way out of this now, he stated, his gaze sweeping over their terrified faces. We have to expose Victor Beaumont. Publicly. And we have to do it before he can silence all of you permanently. He looked at Maria. Those documents, Maria, combined with your testimony and Clara and Miguel's story of finding Grace, if we can get all of that to the right people, to a fearless investigative journalist, to state authorities beyond Beaumont's corrupting influence, it's our only chance. As if to punctuate his words, a series of heavy, deliberate footsteps sounded on the wooden porch of the rectory, just outside the study window. Father John's eyes widened in terror. They're here, he breathed. They've found us. The doorknob began to turn. The heavy, deliberate footsteps on the rectory porch froze them all. The doorknob, an ornate brass fixture, began to turn with agonizing slowness. Father John, his kindly face pale but resolute, moved with a surprising swiftness, positioning himself directly in front of the study door, just as it was pushed inward. Two large men in dark, ill-fitting suits filled the doorway, their expressions hard, their eyes cold and assessing. Behind them, Clara could glimpse others fanning out, clearly intending to surround the small building. Cooper, standing beside Maria, emitted a low, menacing growl, every muscle in his powerful body tensed, ready to defend. "Evening, Father," the lead man said, his voice a gravelly baritone that oozed false bonhomie. He flashed a cheap-looking badge that glinted dully in the dim hallway light. "Name's Johnson. Private investigator. We have reason to believe you're harboring a fugitive, a woman named Maria Santos. She's wanted for questioning in relation to child abduction." His gaze flickered past the priest, trying to peer into the shadowed room beyond. Father John stood firm, his small stature somehow imbued with an unshakable moral authority. "Child abduction," he repeated, his voice calm but edged with steel. "That is a most serious accusation, Mr. Johnson. May I see your warrant, please, and your official identification?" The man's smirk faltered. "A warrant's on its way, Father, just a formality." "We know she's in here." A second voice, colder, more cultured, drifted from behind Johnson. It was a man Clara recognized with a jolt of fear from Victor Beaumont's earlier visit, one of his close aides. "Father John," the aide said, his tone silken, but laced with unmistakable menace. "Mr. Beaumont has always been a most generous benefactor to St. Joseph's. It would be unfortunate if that generosity were to be jeopardized by any misunderstanding or lack of cooperation in a matter of such personal importance to him and Mrs. Beaumont." The implied threat was as clear as it was chilling. Father John's quiet dignity remained unruffled. "Mr. Beaumont's contributions to this parish, while appreciated, do not grant him or his associates the right to circumvent the law or harass its citizens, sir," he stated firmly. "Without a legally executed warrant from a judge, you will not be entering this rectory further. Now, I must ask you to leave the premises." The men exchanged frustrated, angry glances, but the priest's unwavering stance, and perhaps the unspoken threat of a public scandal if they forced their way into a church rectory without clear legal authority, gave them pause. They backed off the porch, but their angry mutterings and the sound of their footsteps moving around the perimeter of the house confirmed Miguel's whispered fear. "They're not leaving. They'll surround us. They'll wait." Quickly, Father John urged, his composure regained. "There isn't much time. They may not have a warrant now, but a man like Beaumont can procure one soon enough, or simply decide to act without one." He led them, his movements surprisingly agile for his age, towards a heavy, oak-paneled section of the study wall. With a grunt of effort he pushed, and a hidden door, cleverly disguised as a bookshelf, swung inward, revealing a narrow, stone-lined passage descending into darkness. "An old priest's hole," he explained, lighting a dusty oil lantern, "leads to the church cellars. Built during times of persecution long ago, rarely used, but tonight I think divinely opportune." The tunnel was damp, smelling of centuries of cold stone and disuse. Cooper, his initial aggression towards the men outside now channeled into a focused, protective alertness, stayed close to Maria, who clutched Grace tightly, her face a mask of terror. Clara and Miguel followed, their hearts pounding, Dr. Peterson bringing up the rear. When they finally emerged into the cavernous, vaulted cellar beneath St. Joseph's Church, the air was heavy with the scent of old wine and incense. Dr. Peterson, the most agile among them despite his age, volunteered to scout ahead. He ascended the narrow stone steps leading up into the darkened church nave, disappearing for several tense minutes. He returned with a grim report. "The church itself is empty, locked up tight for the night," he whispered. "But I saw them. One of their black sedans is still parked conspicuously across the main street. They're watching, waiting for us to break cover." They huddled in the cold, damp cellar, the silence broken only by Grace's soft breathing and Cooper's occasional reassuring lick to Maria's hand. Hours passed. The faint sounds from the street above eventually dwindled as the town settled into sleep. It was Father John who finally devised a plan. "They'll be expecting you to try and leave by road, perhaps in my old car, or Dr. Peterson's," he mused. "We need a diversion, something to draw their attention away from the real escape." He then outlined a simple but clever ruse, involving a timed distraction at the far end of the church property. As the first pale streaks of pre-dawn light began to paint the eastern sky, their plan was set in motion. Mr. Harrison, the kind elderly neighbor from Clara's earlier separate ordeal, now an established friend and ally through Dr. Peterson's network of trusted individuals, had been contacted by the doctor with a coded message. He was waiting, as arranged, with his sturdy, unassuming pickup truck parked in a shadowed alleyway several blocks from the church, its engine running quietly. The reunion between Clara and Cooper, who had been a steadfast presence beside Maria since their emotional reunion in the confessional, was a brief, reaffirming touch. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, his usual exuberance tempered by a remarkable intelligent calm. He allowed Dr. Peterson to gently guide Maria, still cradling a now sleeping Grace, into the passenger seat of Harrison's truck, then hopped willingly into the truck bed beside Clara and Miguel, settling down without a sound. Mr. Harrison, his weathered face set with a quiet determination, pulled the truck out of the alley just as a minor commotion, a series of preset alarms, and a deliberately noisy, botched entry into an old storage shed on church grounds, orchestrated by a trusted parishioner at Father John's request, erupted at the opposite end of the church block. Clara, looking back, saw one of the black sedans peel away from its surveillance point, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom as it sped towards the sound of the diversion. But as Harrison's truck turned onto the main county road heading out of town, Clara's blood ran cold. In the rear-view mirror, she saw another set of headlights flare to life, pulling out from a side street, steadily, implacably, beginning to follow them. Their ruse had only bought them a partial reprieve. They were being pursued. The journey to the state capitol in Mr. Harrison's rattling, aging pickup truck was a nerve-wracking ordeal. Every passing car, every distant siren sent fresh jolts of anxiety through them. Maria sat rigidly in the front, clutching Grace, her eyes darting nervously towards the side mirrors. In the back, huddled under a rough tarpaulin, Clara and Miguel exchanged worried glances. Cooper, a warm, reassuring presence between them. Dr. Peterson, remarkably calm amidst the tension, had made a series of discreet calls on his burner phone. He'd finally managed to reach an old friend, Robert Mendez, a respected, Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist at the state Capitol Beacon, one of the few newspapers in the state known for its independence and its willingness to challenge powerful interests. Mendez, intrigued and concerned by the urgency in Peterson's voice, had agreed to meet them, despite the late hour, at the newspaper's downtown office. It was nearly midnight when Mr. Harrison, after a series of evasive maneuvers through the city's deserted streets, finally pulled up to the darkened, imposing building that housed the Beacon. The newsroom was a vast, echoing space, eerily silent, the rows of computer terminals dark, the air thick with the smell of old newsprint and stale coffee. Robert Mendez met them at the security desk, a man in his late 40s with tired eyes that had seen too much, a rumpled suit, and an aura of relentless, cynical idealism. He led them to a small, cluttered conference room. There, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, Maria Santos, her voice at first trembling, then gaining strength from a deep well of maternal fury and a desperate need for justice, recounted her entire, harrowing story. She spoke of Victor Beaumont's insidious advances, his threats, her isolation, the forced concealment of her pregnancy. She described the birth of her daughter, the cold-hearted abduction by Victor, Eleanor's chilling complicity, and her own desperate flight. Cooper lay faithfully at her feet throughout her testimony, his great head resting on her shoe, occasionally lifting it to nudge her hand with his wet nose, a silent, constant source of comfort and solidarity. "Doctor." Peterson then stepped in, his voice calm and authoritative, as he explained the medical evidence, Grace's condition upon discovery, the distinctive familial traits he had observed, the disturbing phone call inquiring about making a baby disappear. Clara, her own voice thick with emotion, described finding Grace by the creek, Cooper's incredible heroism, and Victor Beaumont's subsequent menacing visit to their farm, his pointed questions, his veiled threats. Robert Mendez listened intently, his expression unreadable, occasionally jotting notes in a worn leather-bound notebook. When they had finished, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "It's an extraordinary, horrifying story," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "And frankly, if it weren't for Dr. Peterson vouching for you and the sheer unbelievable consistency of your accounts, I might find it hard to credit. But Victor Beaumont, his reputation for ruthlessness is well known, though always carefully hidden beneath a veneer of philanthropy and civic duty." He looked directly at Maria. "You mentioned documents, proof. I need to see them." "Those documents are the key to corroborating everything you've told me." Maria nodded, her dark eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce resolve. "They are safe," she said. "In a safe deposit box, at City Central Bank, just a few blocks from here. But," she added, a flicker of anxiety returning, "the bank will be closed now. And the access protocol, I am the only one who can open it. And given what's happened, I believe I need an official, credible witness to accompany me when I do." Robert Mendez didn't hesitate. "I'll be that witness, Ms. Santos," he said, a new gleam of journalistic fervor in his tired eyes. "Let's go get your proof." It was approaching 2 o'clock in the morning, the city streets deserted and silent, when Robert Mendez's unremarkable sedan pulled up a block away from the imposing, neoclassical facade of City Central Bank. As they rounded the corner, their blood collectively froze. 3 sleek black sedans were parked strategically around the bank's entrance, their tinted windows glinting ominously under the streetlights. And standing amongst a coterie of hard-faced men in dark suits, his features illuminated by the cold, artificial light, was Victor Beaumont himself. Beside him, a fur stole clutched tightly around her shoulders despite the mildness of the night, stood Eleanor Beaumont, her expression a mask of icy disdain. Mendez swore softly under his breath. "Damn it! He must have anticipated this. Someone must have tipped him off when you tried to access the box remotely, Maria, or perhaps they had a tail on us from the church, more sophisticated than Harrison thought." He cut the engine. "Stay here, all of you. Let me handle this initially." Robert Mendez, his press pass clearly visible in his jacket pocket, approached the group with a calm, professional demeanor that belied the frantic thumping of his own heart. "Mr. Beaumont." "Mrs. Beaumont," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the silent street. "Robert Mendez, State Capitol Beacon. I wonder if I might have a word with you regarding a Ms. Maria Santos and certain allegations concerning events that transpired at one of your private family properties a few weeks ago." The name, Maria Santos, struck Victor Beaumont like a physical blow. A flicker of something akin to panic, quickly suppressed, crossed his usually impassive face. He exchanged a swift, almost imperceptible glance with Eleanor. "Maria Santos," he scoffed, his voice regaining its customary arrogant timbre, though a shade too loud, a fraction too dismissive. "I vaguely recall the name. A disgruntled former employee, I believe, prone to fabrications, utterly unreliable." Eleanor Beaumont laughed, a short, brittle sound devoid of any humor. "Indeed, some people are just so ungrateful, Mr. Mendez. You offer them employment, shelter, and this is how they repay you, with scurrilous lies." Robert Mendez's eyes narrowed. He could feel the faint vibration of the miniature digital recorder in his breast pocket. Lies, Mrs. Beaumont. Such as the lie that Ms. Santos's newborn child tragically died, when in fact that child was forcibly taken from her, and then, it seems, abandoned to die in a cold creek. Victor and Eleanor both went rigid. The accidental, indirect confirmation of their knowledge of the child, their desperate attempts to cover it up, hung in the air, heavy and damning. Victor's face contorted in a mask of fury. He realized too late the trap Mendes had sprung. That phone. He roared, his voice cracking, gesturing wildly towards Mendes. "He's recording! Get that phone! Get it now!" His men started to surge forward. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Beaumont." A new voice, calm, authoritative, and utterly unexpected, cut through the tension. Detective Miller, a seasoned, no-nonsense officer from the State Police Major Crimes Unit, whom Mendes, anticipating trouble, had discreetly alerted before leaving the beacon, stepped out from the shadows of a nearby alleyway, flanked by several uniformed state troopers. "Mr. Victor Beaumont, Mrs. Eleanor Beaumont," Miller stated, his gaze unwavering. "I am Detective Miller, State Police. I'd like you both to accompany us to headquarters to answer some questions regarding extremely serious allegations. Allegations including, but not limited to, abuse of power, coercion, criminal endangerment of a child, conspiracy, and highly questionable financial activities." Victor and Eleanor sputtered, their faces masks of outrage and disbelief, protesting their innocence, threatening lawsuits, name-dropping influential friends. It was futile. Robert Mendes held up his small digital recorder, a slight triumphant smile playing on his lips. From the shadows of Mendes's car, Maria Santos slowly, courageously emerged, Grace held tightly, protectively in her arms. Cooper, at her side, let out a single, low growl directed at the Beaumonts. As Victor and Eleanor laid eyes on Maria, on the child they had tried to erase, their expressions morphed into masks of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Doctor." Peterson stepped forward, his voice clear and strong in the pre-dawn stillness, as he formally identified Grace and confirmed her distinctive birthmark, and the medical evidence linking her ordeal directly to Maria's testimony. The fight visibly drained out of Victor and Eleanor Beaumont. Flanked by the state troopers, their reign of impunity, their carefully constructed world of secrets and lies, was finally, irrevocably crumbling around them. They were arrested, their protests now merely the pathetic squawks of cornered animals.